Yeah, so Mallet, the issue of the Ethiopian, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam as a project, what it represents from a Pan-African perspective, and to me as a Pan-Africanist, or someone who wants to see Africa occupy that position on the world stage, which is supposed to that position which is supposed to be reflected in the capacity and capability of its people and the resources which it has on the continent. I think that the Ethiopia Grand Renaissance, the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, the GERD, represents the future. It also represents not only that, but represents what the Prime Minister Abiy called the Renaissance Africa, okay, the Pan African Renaissance. Or when he was giving his speech at the just completed 35th ordinary session of the African Union, he spoke of we want a renaissance Africa, Africa built on Pan-African ideals. So this is what this dam represents. This is what Nkrumah envisioned when Nkrumah was talking, in 1963 in Addis Ababa at the formation of the Organization of African Unity. Of course, an organization which he stood against, and he didn't want it formed. He wanted the union government to be formed, but because of certain sabotage and imperialist intrigue and sabotages and disturbances on the continent and infiltration, we were not able to achieve a union government. So, but what Nkrumah envisioned is such projects as this. We know that the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam is one of the largest dams in the world. Is seventh. People have said it's the seventh biggest in the world, and the biggest in Africa. So you can imagine, the magnitude of this project, and why the Prime Minister Abiy, he insisted that this project has to go ahead. Why he has fought so hard, to see that this project goes so, successful, is completed, it starts producing power, because it doesn't only, it is not going to, benefit only Ethiopia. We know that at the beginning of this year, Ethiopia signed contracts, power contracts, the delivery of power, electricity, to Kenya. They signed the contracts, between January and March. So this is what this dam project, the dam, as a project, represents what a renaissance Africa is supposed to be. Building projects, building mega projects, not only, for ourselves, not only just projects like this dam, but also, projects like you can talk of high-speed trains. We should be able to build our own planes. You can see that China has started building its own planes. Comac, okay? It has, Russia is building its own planes, Sukhoi, Ilyushin. We should be able to build these mega projects, high-speed trains. We should be able to build mega dams, like the dam, this dam has laid the groundwork for the dam that is supposed to be built on the Inga, on the Inga Falls, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We should be able to build interstate highways that are running from Dakar, to Zanzibar, high-speed trains that are running from Cairo to, all the way to Cape, okay, in Azania, in occupied Azania. We should be able to build these interstate projects that are intercrossing Africa. And why are the imperialists sabotaging this? Because this is not the Africa they want. Okay, they fought against Nkrumah because they don't want an Africa that is fully developed, that is operating at full capacity. They don't want the African people to operate at full capacity. So if I may use the same language as they use, the United States and Europe, they represent an existential threat to the African continent and the African people. They are the biggest threat to the African people, in their lives. We have seen the killing of African people in the streets in the United States, in, George Floyd, the strangling in broad daylight. There's no shame now. They don't have any more shame. So the sabotage of Ethiopia, and the attack on Ethiopia, sponsoring groups so that they can disrupt the growth of of Ethiopia is because of such projects, because it is laying the groundwork that the other African countries, are supposed to copy. They are going to emulate, okay, the other African states, because we are always fighting for a unified African government, and this is it, which Prime Minister Abiy has been talking about. Like I say, that they just concluded 35th ordinary session of the African Union. He spoke about the formation of a single media house to dispel the propaganda that is being, pumped out from the fraudulent and the fake CNN, media houses in the West. So this is what the GERD represents. It represents the new Africa. It represents the Africa we want. This is what the GERD is about. Okay, so that is why you see the attacks. That is why you are seeing the attacks on Ethiopia. So these attacks, like I've said in the past, they are not only attacks on Ethiopia. These are attacks on Africa, because they do not want Africa to develop at this magnitude. They don't want these projects to be in Africa. For a very long time, they have been parasites. These are parasites who have been stealing from Africa for a very long time. And they have been building themselves and building their economies on Africa's resources. So they do not want, such projects to go ahead. They do not want this to happen. They don't want us to build high-speed trains. They do not want the African people to operate at full capacity. The capabilities of the African people, they don't want these capabilities to be developed. Okay, instead they want to use Africa as a garden so that they can extract the resources, not only material resources, but extract the human beings, extract the smartest Africans, and be sending them to Europe, sending them to the United States to build the United States. We know that the population in the United States is declining. We know the population in Europe is declining. And where are they banking on getting the population, to build their economies and the resources? Is Africa, because we know that Africa now, 30%, 30 years, people, they occupy around 70%. 70% of the population is below the age of 30 years in Africa. So they are banking on extracting resources from Africa and extracting the human being, the material resources and human beings from the continent to build back the declining United States. United States is declining. This data has come out, like they have been speaking about this for a very long time. Just to give you just a few figures. Just recently, the figures came out in the first quarter of this year. United States economy shrunk by 1.6%. In the second quarter, it shrunk by 0.9%. In Europe, when you go, economies have been shrinking since COVID-19 by 6%, 7%. This is the chaos that you are seeing that is going on in Europe. They are trying to start up some trouble around the world so that they can use this to steal. When there was an economic depression in 2008, they started a war and went to Libya and they stole the gold from Libya. They started stealing Libya's oil, steal from Afghanistan, steal from Iraq. So all these things, if you follow them, they happened after economic depressions in their countries. After economic depressions in the United States and Europe. So these are the problems. So that is why you see the sabotage on this dam. That is why you see the sabotage on Ethiopia. Because the dam, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, represents the Renaissance Africa, represents the new Africa, represents the Africa we want. So from my observation and from my analysis and from my little knowledge, of imperialism, and as a student of, as a studious student of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who was an expert on imperialism and wrote a book called Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, which I would encourage everyone to read, is that this is an attack on Africa, and the United States and Europe represent an existential threat, to the continent of Africa, to the people of Africa, and they are the biggest enemy of the African people in the world. So I want to thank you very much. This is what the GERD represents. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam represents a Pan-African project and represents the future Africa, represents the Africa we want. And the African people and the youth, They have to fight as hard as possible to protect the African continent, because that is where the future is. Our future is within the youth. Thank you very much.